My wife and I live in what most would consider an ordinary suburb, living out a fairly routine life. We have jobs, a house, and friendly neighbors. We don't often encounter anything unusual, which is why the events of that one night still haunt us. That night, after a regular workday, we decided to treat ourselves to dinner at a local restaurant. We returned home around 9 p.m., and by 9:30, we were getting ready for bed. Usually, by 10, we're in bed either reading or watching TV, winding down from the day. At about 10:15, the phone rang. My wife, Gianna, told me not to answer, insisting that calls at that hour never bring good news. But, concerned that it might be an emergency, I reached over to grab the phone. However, it stopped ringing just as I lifted the receiver. Our old landline wasn't great, and once the ringing stopped, the caller ID would vanish, leaving no trace of who had called. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the display showed unknown number, which was unusual, especially at this hour. We both found it strange, but I decided to ignore it, thinking it might be a telemarketer or a wrong number. Yet, as soon as the ringing stopped, it started again. By now, a sense of unease had settled over us, so I decided to answer. On the other end, I heard the voice of our neighbor, Al. He asked, "Do you know the man standing in front of your house?" His question threw me off completely. I replied, "What man?" but he simply told me to go outside and then abruptly hung up. Gianna looked at me, her face pale with fear, and urged me not to go. But I was too curious and worried to ignore Al's warning. I told Gianna I'd just take a peek through the window. I went downstairs and pulled back the curtain slightly. There was no one there, no sign of anyone on our front lawn or the sidewalk. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the bushes and the street. Nothing. I began to think that maybe Al was playing a prank, though it seemed out of character for him. Annoyed and confused, I went back inside and told Gianna there was no one outside. We both found it odd, especially since Al wasn't the type to joke around like that. She suggested I call him back to see what was going on, so I did. But when I dialed his number, it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, asking him to explain what had just happened. Just as I hung up, the phone rang again. The display once more showed unknown caller. I answered, and it was Al again, but before I could say anything, he calmly repeated, "Go outside. There's someone standing outside your house." His voice was unnervingly calm, and then he hung up before I could respond. This time, when I looked out the window, I saw him, a figure standing at the edge of our walkway, where it met the sidewalk. The person was wearing a hood that covered his face entirely, making it impossible to see any features. My heart pounded as I opened the door slightly and called out, "Can I help you?" The figure didn't move, didn't respond. He just stood there, menacingly silent. I threatened to call the police, but there was no reaction. The phone rang again, and I quickly closed the door to answer it. To my shock, the caller ID now showed Al's number, but when I picked up, Al sounded completely normal. "Hey, I just got your voicemail." "What was that about?" he asked, clearly confused. I was baffled and explained that he had just called me twice, warning me about a man outside. Al insisted he hadn't called me, and his confusion seemed genuine. His tone was completely different from the earlier calls. I asked him to check outside his own house, but he said everything looked normal from where he was. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that something very strange was happening. I rushed back to the window, but the man was gone. The street was empty, and there was no sign of anyone. I demanded to know if Al was playing some kind of sick joke, but he swore he wasn't. He even put his wife on the phone to confirm that they hadn't made those earlier calls. In the end, there was nothing more we could do. We got off the phone, but the fear didn't leave us. I went downstairs one last time to hang up the phone in the kitchen. As I did, I couldn't resist one final glance out the window. The man was no longer there, but the feeling of being watched, of being toyed with by something or someone beyond my understanding, stayed with me. We never figured out what happened that night. The call stopped, and the man never returned. But the experience left us shaken, forever altering our sense of safety in our own home. Even now, whenever the phone rings late at night, a part of me wonders if it's him, or whatever it was, coming back to finish what it started.